My Nerd World.
Where's the revolution? Come on, people, you're letting me down. Where's the revolution? Come on, people, you're letting me down.
Welcome to My Nerd World, episode 20 of Depeche Mode, the podcast. Although, and I can't give credit where credit is due because I forgot, I think it was Shane. I think it was Shane Perry who called it a modecast. And I actually liked that quite a bit. Because I feel they keep dancing around on the title of the podcast. I originally started off with pretty simple Depeche Mode, the podcast. But I do like modecast quite a bit. I'll have to put some thought on that. It is episode 20. It's going to be a short one this week, and I'll explain. I feel bad because it's been a little over about a week and a half since I've been able to do the podcast. And this is for good reason, and I'll explain what I've been up to. I also want to let you know what the future of the podcast is going to be, at least for the time being, and a request from you as the listener to the podcast. And so if you haven't emailed me before, this is a good opportunity for you to write down my email address, talkshownerd@gmail.com, talkshownerd@gmail.com. That is available in the notes for this week's podcast and every podcast prior to episode 20. So again, talkshownerd@gmail.com. That is going to be important as we get later on into the show. So first off, there's not a lot of news to talk about. I do want to get into the live stream from Lisbon, and I believe I'm saying that correctly, Portugal. We're down to our last 5 or 6 European shows, and this is going to kind of dictate the future of the podcast a bit. And again, I'll get into this coming up. But the band did do a full live stream of the European tour. It's available up on YouTube. I have not had the opportunity to sit down and watch it in its entirety. And I'll be honest with you, I've seen, I think, like all the footage from the shows. I've certainly watched all of the entirety of the warm-up shows. But I don't think that I've really sat down and watched the entire concert from beginning to end. And so I plan on doing that this weekend. I did spend some time watching a few of the songs from the live stream, but I really want the opportunity to sit down again on a Friday or Saturday night with my bottle of wine, with the lights turned off, and to really take in the show. Unfortunately, I still don't have any scheduled plans to see them live yet, and I don't honestly know if it's going to be able to happen. I'm just looking at my schedule, and I've talked about this on previous podcasts. I'm not seeing a way to completely make it happen for a number of reasons. I'm obviously going to try. I would be devastated if I didn't get a chance to see this tour live. I've seen every other tour since Music for the Masses. I've been to, 32, 33 shows live. I mean, it's not like I haven't seen my share of Depeche Mode shows, but I just, for as much as I love this album, and from what I've seen on the tour, and especially what I've seen from this live stream, I really want to get out and see it live. I just don't know if it's going to happen. So, because I'm not sure, I feel comfortable in sitting down and absorbing all of this live stream, and hopefully I'm going to do that this weekend. So again, I'll get into a little bit more of that and a couple of notes just from what I've watched so far of that live stream of the concert. And so I know I did kind of a review of the show in a previous podcast, but I watched that segmented, and a lot of that was also based on those warm-up shows. So hopefully there'll be a podcast here in the next week or so where I'll be able to kind of give my full review and further thoughts on that live stream in and of itself. So just a real quick item of note as to why I haven't been able to do the podcast. So as I talked about in episode 19, I went to Washington, D.C. a couple of weeks back at the end of the last week of June. And I had just enough time to to bang out another podcast before I ended up getting in the car and leaving for Yellowstone National Park in Wyoming. So I actually had flown. I flew back from D.C. on Friday, the last Friday of June. I recorded that podcast Saturday, and then I was in the car and I was off to Yellowstone. We drove there over Sunday and Monday. We spent Monday. We got there late Monday, and then spent Tuesday and Wednesday there, and then left Thursday morning and came home. It was just an exhausting week. And when I got to the weekend, it just I was so tired. I was so dog tired. I had my other NASCAR podcast that I do that I needed to get out because we obviously had a race on a Saturday night. But I just didn't get a chance to get to the podcast, and so that's why it's taken me a few extra days to get this particular one done. So, speaking of the podcast, and before I move forward, let's talk a little bit about the future of the podcast and the help I would like to have from you. And I say help; it's just this is something that I would like to do. I've had a number of different ideas for the podcast, as I've talked about, and these are still things. I have a list. I basically have. I have kind of a cheat sheet. I have a list. I have my Depeche Mode podcast list and the items and the things that I want to do with this podcast in the future. As I've talked about, I do intend to spend entire shows talking about individual albums to hopefully go and create a catalog of podcasts for every album, my thoughts, your thoughts on those albums, and I want to be able to give you a heads up so that you can help me in the content. I've talked quite a bit about the possibility of bringing you on as a guest to come on the show. And again, it's been more of a logistical issue in doing that. These are not excuses. These are just sort of real world issues. And I believe in being absolutely upfront and honest. I'd love to do that. It's just really difficult for me to lock down an exact point in time because a lot of times when I head into the weekend, I get inspired to go and do the podcast, and I do it at random times, and so that's why I haven't done that. Needless to say, I do have a collection of emails from you who've expressed interest in being on the show, so that's something that I want to do in the future. In the more immediate future, the plan for the podcast as of right now, because I feel really bad because I know that when you listen to a podcast and you enjoy listening to a podcast, there is a certain expectation to have it out at a certain time every single week because you're waiting for it. And I know that because I listen to podcasts. And when they don't arrive when I want them to arrive, I get disappointed. So I know that that's difficult for individuals. And so I feel bad about that. And again, I felt bad for getting this particular episode out late. For as much as I want to do a podcast every single week, I'm finding it increasingly difficult. Not necessarily because of content, but just because of life getting in the way and my regular job. I've also started a project, and I'm not ready to say what that project is. My wife is the only one that knows what this project is, but this particular thing that I've begun, this new passion project that I've begun working on, I need, and I'd like to be able to focus on it. And doing an abundance of podcasts makes it a little bit difficult for me to do that with my regular job. So for the time being, I do plan on doing a podcast again next week after I've had the opportunity to sit down this weekend and watch all of that Portugal show. And again, I do have some thoughts on that to share with you, the live stream. So there will be an episode 21. Hopefully that'll be out on Sunday. After that, I'm not sure how consistent the podcast is going to be. I would really like to do it every week. I really would. And sometimes it's easy because I'm really, really amped and I want to do it. And sometimes it's hard because I don't want to force myself to do it. And if you've been listening since day one, you know those shows where I've made comments that, man, I wasn't really in it and I feel bad for that. And I don't want to do that. So I'm stuck between a rock and a hard place. I'm stuck between making sure I get an episode out every week and making sure that the episode is really, really what I want it to be. So as of right now, again, there'll be an episode 21 coming up this weekend, and after that, I just don't know. Hopefully, I'll have a better idea. I may have to take a bit of a break from the show, and perhaps I can schedule it where we'll get one every 2 weeks. I've talked about that before. Maybe every 3 weeks. Maybe once a month. Until I can finish this other project that I'm working on, and I'm not 100% sure exactly how long that's going to take. It's not Depeche Mode related directly, although Depeche Mode is a part of it. So I'm not ready to divulge exactly what it is. I think for a segment of the audience of you listening, you'll really enjoy it. I hope everybody enjoys it, but I know for a segment of you listening that perhaps listens to the other podcasts, whether it's NASCAR or my Star Wars podcast, you'll enjoy it. So, again, podcast, this weekend, episode 21, and after that, there's kind of a bit of a question mark. This is where you come in, and this is where I'd like to appeal to you. If you have time, if you enjoyed this podcast, I'm not looking for money. I don't do these podcasts for money. One day it would be nice if I got to the point where I was able to add some advertising. I've looked into it with the podcast, but really, I could actually do some advertising on this particular podcast. I've really just chosen not to, because I want the flexibility, because I wasn't exactly sure how often I was going to be able to do the podcast, and so I didn't want to get locked down into a contract, forcing myself into something if my heart wasn't really in it. And Depeche Mode is the podcast where I could do some advertising. So if it reaches a point where the podcast gets big enough where it's worth it, and I can devote more time to it, especially when my other project's done, then absolutely you'll be getting one every single week. So here's my request from you. I know we have some regulars that email, and I really do appreciate it. But what I'd really like is if you can take the time to email me, talkshownerd@gmail.com. And we've done this throughout previous podcasts, but I'd like it to continue. Your thoughts about Depeche Mode. Topics that you want to hear me talk about, that you want to share your thoughts on. I don't care what it is, as long as it relates to Depeche Mode. If you want to ask me a question, if you want my thoughts on something, if you just want to express yourself, if you don't do a podcast, right, and you want to be a part of one because you want to get your voice out there, even if it's just me reading your words, then please email me. I would love to, and I do have some. I don't have time to get to them today, again, because of my time constraints. But I would love to get just a slate of emails, and to get that email, that email, I don't want to say archive, but I'd love to get a bunch of emails to where I have the opportunity to maybe just grab an email and do a podcast on that email. In previous shows, I know that I've attempted to get to email, but I haven't had the time to cover all the emails. So maybe we go that route. Maybe you email me your thoughts, questions from me about the band. You want to dissect a song. You want me to dissect a song. You want to talk about an album. You want to talk about what you like from the band in the future, if they're going to stay together, whatever it is. Drop me an email, talkshownerd@gmail.com. And I'd love to be able to have that to have you as a resource. Because so much of this has been coming from me. But I'll tell you what, the part of the podcast that I've enjoyed doing the most, kind of the reason why I started this, my love of Depeche Mode, has been you sharing your thoughts and your love of Depeche Mode. That's been really the biggest joy, my joy, if you will. By the way, one of my favorite B-sides. That song, My Joy, one of the B-sides from Songs of Faith and Devotion, I love that song. Absolutely love that song. It's really simple. I mean, there's not really a lot to it. It reminds me a bit of But Not Tonight in terms of its simplicity. You're not looking at a lot of real deep lyrics there, but man, I love that song. That one and Get Right From Me, and I think I've talked about that before, but Get Right With Me. Those two songs together, so good and so different. I mean, not necessarily from each other. I mean, they're certainly in that Songs of Faith and Devotion era, but just different from other things they've done. Certainly different from what we get on Spirit, right? But man, My Joy is just great. But My Joy, okay, right? The blood in my veins is when I hear from you, and when I'm able to read your emails and to expand upon what you're saying and hear your thoughts and hear your passion. Again, this was born out of my passion to want to listen to a Depeche Mode podcast, so I decided to do one on my own. So again, talkshownerd@gmail.com. And it would just be fantastic to be able to, maybe every week, maybe that would provide me the opportunity, even if it's not for a full 45 minutes, but maybe just enough to just answer email. I do want to keep doing this. Please do not misunderstand. And this podcast isn't going to go away. I'm just having difficulty doing it on a consistent basis. And this other project, which I'm really excited about, and it's been coming along a lot better than I thought it would. I just need to be able to devote some more time to it. And doing my full-time job, being a husband, a father to two wonderful boys. It tends to be, and then doing all these podcasts, it tends to be a lot. So I've got to shave somewhere. But maybe with your help, we together can keep this going on a consistent level. So one last time, podcasts for sure this weekend. I'll do some reviews of the Lisbon show, maybe read some of the emails, and again, some of the ones that I have a few that I have been holding on, but I've been holding on to them because I want to spend some time with them, and then we'll see where we go from there. So talkshownerd@gmail.com. Drop me an email, Depeche Mode related. I don't care what it is, but let's talk via email and let's see where this ends up going. So, all right, there was one thing. I sat down and I watched a bit of that live stream, and I didn't know they were doing it. I probably would have tried to watch it live, although I don't think I would have been able to based on when it aired. Because I was out of the loop, I spent a lot of time listening to Depeche on my on my travels, and it's been really fun because my son, my 10-year-old, has been listening to the band, and my wife has rediscovered the band, and it is fascinating to watch a 10-year-old kid listen to these songs that I grew up with and the songs that he gravitates towards. And a lot of them are the classic singles. I mean, like a song like Master and Servant, which of course is way above his sort of understanding, but I remember being just a few years older than he was listening to Master and Servant, not really quite understanding what the lyrical content was, just enjoying the songs, man, and it is just fascinating to see the band resonate in such a young kid. And that wasn't even me trying. It wasn't even me, like, my boys know how much I love Depeche Mode, but it wasn't like me pushing it on them at all. They've heard me play it before. I've played it in the car. This was just, they started listening to it, and Melinda pulled out her playlist, and they made a playlist on iTunes of all the Depeche Mode songs, and they were just listening to them over and over and over again. It was really amazing, and it's exciting to me to think that they'll grow up with that. You know, like I was exposed to a lot of jazz, but it didn't really stick. There's a few bands from when I was younger. Steely Dan. There's very few bands from that era that I like. I don't like classic rock at all. But Steely Dan was a band that I really liked from when I was growing up. Pink Floyd, one of the few bands from that era that I actually like. And you could make some relations to Depeche Mode or some comparisons to Depeche Mode in both of those bands. So I wonder what it's going to be like for my boys as they grow up and whether or not the band ends up sticking with them the way that it stuck with me. For you listening, not all of you, but for a lot of you listening, I know you fall into that. Again, and then on top of all this, I had a birthday on Saturday, so I turned 45. Woohoo! But I know you fall into that 40-year-old age range, and so you were there during those magic years, you know, the pre-internet years, and they were the magic years. Those were very special years, and when I go to the shows, there's an attempt to sort of recapture those moments that we had when we were kids, the nostalgia part of it, and so much of the music of Depeche Mode is that sort of flashback nostalgia, those nostalgia tinglers, those reminders, right? Which brings me to that live stream from Portugal. So I sat down and watched it the other night, and it's interesting too because I'll add this to it, and this is sort of to put this in a bit of context. I like to, if you follow me on social media at all, whether it's JON John Justice on Twitter or on Facebook, you may or may not notice this. I don't know if anybody, actually, I honestly don't know if anybody notices this, but I changed my my profile picture. Usually that changes with my race weekends. So when the race weekend rolls around, I'll usually switch to me wearing a NASCAR Dale Jr. hat or something to this effect. I have Star Wars themed profile pictures too, but usually the cover art for my Twitter and my Facebook, those are chosen very specifically. Like the one that I had, I think it's on both of them right now. On our way back from Yellowstone, we stopped by Devil's Tower in Wyoming, and that was for those that don't know, the Devil's Tower was featured prominently. It was a big story point, maybe even almost a MacGuffin, in Close Encounters of the Third Kind, the 80s Steven Spielberg film. That might have even been 70s. Late 70s? I think it was, actually. I think that was like 72, 73. Anyway, we stopped by there, and so right now on my Facebook and my Twitter page is a picture of Devil's Tower. But I'll switch it quite often, and sometimes when I've done the podcast, I've switched it to Depeche Mode. I found live footage or live pictures, or just production photos of the band that I've put up there. So usually when you see those, my Facebook or my Twitter, it's themed for a very specific reason. But to my point, there's something uniquely special and incredibly different about watching a concert, but especially a Depeche Mode concert in the dark. So I found some photos of some of the live shows they did that was still in the daylight, and it just doesn't have that same magic. When you see everything lit up on stage, it just doesn't have the same feel. It's like being in a movie theater, right? And it's not dark. It's just annoying. And I saw some really cool. There's one particular shot I have of Dave during going backwards, and where you can see the background, the different colors on the screen in the background. Really, really great shot. He's still wearing the red jacket, because he peels that off. He does that every single tour. He starts off with multiple layers, and then usually he strips down to basically nothing. Didn't always be that way, right? It was the tank top for the longest time. Still not 100% sure about how I feel about him walking around shirtless, but he's got so many tattoos, it's almost like he's wearing a shirt anyway. So, but be that as it may, there's just something different and special, and Depeche Mode needs to be watched in the dark. The concerts need to be in the dark. In full light just doesn't translate nearly as well. So I was watching a bit of the live stream, and it was Where's the Revolution going into Wrong, if I'm not mistaken. And the intro to Wrong, the stage got black. It had really single-colored, I think it was bluish lights that were rolling around, that were sort of randomly moving, okay? Always loved the light shows. And this tour especially, the light show seems really, really good. The light show's been lacking, in my view, a lot, even going back to World Violation. That was like the best light show that I think they've had in a long time. They seem to really have returned back to something special with the light show. But the intro to Wrong, I'm watching this, and it was really random. It was in the it was early evening, and I threw it on, and I was watching it, and everybody was quiet in the house, and I just kind of zeroed in on it, and man, if that didn't pull the nostalgia strings, I don't know what does. It really was just cool. It reminded me of Collide at the opening of the World Violation tour with the big DM banners that were up right before they opened, before the opening song, and it was just one of those moments again where it took me back to that magic period. It took me back to that time. It was so singularly Depeche Mode and so unique and special. There is a magic to this band. And every once in a while, if you are, in this case, if you're quiet enough and you just sort of let yourself get into it, it just washes over you. And I've noticed that a lot, not just with listening to music, but watching movies too. We're so distracted by, and I'm not going to go too deep on this, but we're so distracted by our phones, our iPads. I've had to force myself to put the iPad and the phone away, put it off to the side when I'm watching a movie at home, because I don't allow myself to get immersed into the film, into what the director is trying to portray, into what the photographer is trying to show. The same thing can be said for music. Now, music's a little different. I think we've become accustomed to having music on in the background, driving in our cars, doing things around the house. But when you're taking in the visuals of a Depeche Mode show, in this case, to set everything aside and just be in the moment. That's the purest way that I can say it. Just be there in the moment and let the moment capture you. And in that second, without even trying, that happened. I went, man, God, I love this band. I just love this band. There's such a magic there. And it was actually in that moment where I was thinking about the podcast and how I needed to do a podcast, and I didn't have time at that moment in time. And so thinking, you know what, I need to spend some time. I'm going to watch this over the weekend. I'm going to put away a bottle and maybe a half of my favorite red wine and watch it once the family goes to bed and just be in the moment. It won't be like being there, but my 60-inch TV and my surround sound and this pre-recorded live stream of this amazing show from this amazing band for that point in time will just have to suffice. So I'll give you my thoughts on that again on episode 21 next week. And my apologies. I know there are those that have taken time to email, I really do appreciate it. Those that take time to download it, I really appreciate it. I've always told myself I wanted to be open and honest with the podcast, and I do plan on keep doing it. I just don't know the frequency of it, and so I may have to take a break, and that break might coincide with the ending of this tour. So I'm going to do episode 21, and then I might just take a break to focus on my other project until the shows start in the U.S., and we can pick it up from there and talk about any potential changes to the set list or the tour once they arrive here stateside. So, there you go. Thanks again for downloading it, and I will be putting up another show this weekend, and talkshownerd@gmail.com is the email address. Again, you can find this on YouTube, you can find it on Spreaker, you can find it on Stitcher, you can find it on iTunes, and you can find it on Podbean. I look forward to hearing from you. I look forward to the next time that we have a chance to talk. If you haven't watched that live stream of the entire show and you don't mind getting spoiled, if you haven't seen this tour live yet, check it out, and I'll give you my thoughts coming up later on in the week. Until then, thanks again so much for downloading Depeche Mode, the podcast, or Modecast, whichever you want to call it. And I'll talk to you again real soon. Bye.
My Nerd World.